It all started on a chilly February evening in 2024. The air was thick with anticipation as millions of viewers tuned in to watch what many were calling the debate of the decade. Social media platforms buzzed like never before, hashtags trending left and right, memes already flooding timelines. Everyone wanted a front-row seat to this clash. Two powerful voices from opposite ends of the political spectrum going head-to-head. On one side stood Candace Owens, known for her sharp tongue and unwavering confidence. She had built her reputation by challenging progressive narratives and advocating for conservative values. Her supporters saw her as fearless, someone who spoke truth to power without flinching. Critics, however, called her divisive, accusing her of using controversy to stay relevant. Love her or hate her, no one could deny that she knew how to command attention. Across the stage sat Jasmine Crockett, a rising star among progressives. As a congresswoman, she had spent years fighting for policies aimed at uplifting marginalized communities. Her fiery speeches often highlighted systemic inequalities, and her passion resonated deeply with those who felt overlooked by traditional politics. But just like Owens, she wasn't without her critics. Some accused her of being too idealistic, others claimed her solutions lacked practicality. Still, there was no denying her charisma or her ability to rally people around her cause. The topic? Racial inequality, economic reform, and the future of America's social systems. It was a loaded lineup, guaranteed to spark fireworks. Both women walked onto the stage under bright lights, their body language saying more than words ever could. Owens carried herself with the poise of someone ready to conquer, while Crockett exuded determination, her eyes locked on the prize. The moderator introduced them briefly, but it was clear everyone was eager to skip the formalities and dive straight into the action. From the very first question, things got intense. The moderator asked about racial inequality in America, a topic both women had spoken about extensively. Crockett leaned forward, speaking passionately about generational poverty and the need for sweeping reforms. Her voice rose with conviction, painting a picture of a nation still grappling with its past sins. But then came Owens's response, and oh, did it hit hard? With pinpoint precision, she dismantled Crockett's arguments piece by piece. She pointed out inconsistencies, questioned the effectiveness of proposed policies, and even challenged some of Crockett's statistics. Her delivery was calm yet cutting, almost surgical in its execution. Every word seemed calculated, every pause deliberate. By the time 5 minutes had passed, the audience was glued to their screens, jaws dropping as Owens delivered what many would later call the takedown of the century. Crockett tried to respond, but Owens didn't let up. Each time Crockett made a point, Owens countered with razor-sharp rebuttals. Words like hypocrisy and empty promises echoed through the auditorium, leaving Crockett visibly shaken. For anyone watching, it was clear that this wasn't just a debate. It was a battle, and Owens was winning. As the clock ticked down those crucial 5 minutes, something shifted in the room. People weren't just listening anymore, they were reacting. Gasps filled the auditorium, murmurs rippled through the crowd, and online, comments sections exploded. Supporters of Owens cheered wildly, praising her intellect and fearlessness. Meanwhile, fans of Crockett scrambled to defend her, accusing Owens of being overly aggressive and dismissive. But here's the thing, the drama didn't end when the timer buzzed. In fact, what happened next sent shockwaves across the entire country. This wasn't just another heated exchange between two politicians. It was a moment that forced Americans to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their divided nation. Little did anyone know, this debate would become a catalyst for events that nobody saw coming. Stay tuned, because what unfolded afterward is a story you won't believe, not unless you hear it yourself. The moment the debate ended, chaos erupted. People didn't just talk about it. They argued, debated, and dissected every single second of what had unfolded. Social media platforms went into overdrive. Clips of Owens's sharp takedown spread, like wildfire, shared millions of times within hours. Memes popped up everywhere, some mocking Crockett's struggles during the exchange, others celebrating Owens as if she'd won a championship fight. It felt like the entire country was divided right down the middle. For Owens supporters, this was more than just a victory. It was vindication. They saw her performance as proof that conservative ideas could hold their own against progressive rhetoric. Online forums buzzed with praise, calling her fearless, brilliant, and unapologetic. One viral tweet read, "Candace didn't just win the debate, she exposed the cracks in the other side's foundation." Supporters rallied behind her, urging her to keep pushing forward, to take on bigger challenges and louder opponents. But for Crockett's camp, the aftermath was brutal. Progressive circles scrambled to defend her, accusing Owens of bulldozing the conversation instead of engaging in meaningful dialogue. Some pointed fingers at the moderator, claiming the questions were biased. Others argued that Owens's aggressive style made it impossible for Crockett to get a word in edgewise. Late-night talk shows picked apart every detail, with comedians cracking jokes at both women's expense. The pressure mounted, and soon Crockett found herself facing criticism not only from her opponents but also from her own allies. What made things worse was how personal it got. People weren't just debating policies anymore. They were attacking character. Owens's critics accused her of being cold-hearted, saying she cared more about winning arguments than solving real-world problems. Meanwhile, Crockett faced harsh scrutiny for how she handled herself under pressure. Some called her performance weak, questioning whether she had what it took to stand firm in the political arena. Supporters of both sides dug trenches deeper than ever, hurling insults and accusations back and forth. Amid all the noise, something unexpected began to happen. Away from the cameras and the endless commentary, ordinary people started reflecting on what they had witnessed. For many, the debate wasn't just about two individuals. It was a mirror held up to society. Families gathered around dinner tables. Friends texted each other late at night. Co-workers whispered during breaks. Conversations shifted from who won or lost to bigger questions. Why are we so divided? Can we ever find common ground? Are these debates helping us move forward, or just driving us further apart? In the days following the debate, news outlets tried to keep up with the frenzy. Cable networks aired special segments analyzing every angle. Analysts broke down body language, tone, and word choice. Political experts weighed in, predicting how the fallout might impact upcoming elections. But despite all the coverage, no one seemed to agree on what it all meant. Was this a turning point, or just another chapter in America's ongoing culture war? Meanwhile, Congresswoman Crockett retreated from the public eye. She canceled appearances, skipped interviews, and stayed off social media. Rumors swirled about her mental state. Friends close to her revealed that she spent hours replaying the debate, dissecting where she went wrong. Some even suggested she considered stepping away from politics altogether. The weight of the moment clearly hit her hard, and for the first time people began to see her as human, not just a politician or a symbol of an ideology. On the flip side, Owens appeared unfazed by the backlash. She leaned into the attention, posting videos defending her stance and addressing her critics head-on. Her confidence never wavered, but privately, insiders claimed she too was affected by the intensity of the event. While she projected strength, publicly, those close to her admitted she spent sleepless nights thinking about the impact of her words. After all, debates like this don't just shape careers, they shape lives. As the dust settled, whispers of something surprising began to emerge. Sources leaked that Owens and Crockett had secretly met just days after the debate. No cameras, no reporters, just the two of them sitting across from each other at a quiet cafe. Details of their meeting remained tightly guarded, but rumors hinted that they found common ground on issues like criminal justice reform and education funding. Could this be true? Was it possible that two women who seemed so diametrically opposed could actually connect on a personal level? The idea of reconciliation felt almost too good to be true. Skeptics dismissed it as wishful thinking, while optimists clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this moment could lead to something bigger. Grassroots organizations began organizing discussions inspired by the debate, bringing together people from different backgrounds to talk about solutions rather than arguments. Town halls filled up faster than expected, proving that there was still a hunger for unity, even in the most divided times. But the road ahead wasn't smooth. Critics questioned the authenticity of any potential alliance between Owens and Crockett. Some accused them of using the situation for publicity, while others warned that crossing party lines could alienate their core supporters. The tension grew thicker, and it became clear that whatever path they chose, it wouldn't be easy. Still, amidst the uncertainty, one thing was undeniable. The debate had left an indelible mark on America. It forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their beliefs. It sparked conversations that couldn't be ignored, and whether people loved it or hated it, they couldn't stop talking about it. What happened next would shock the nation and change the course of history in ways no one could have predicted. The debate might have ended, but the real story was just beginning. Behind closed doors, both women were dealing with the aftermath in ways no one could have guessed. For Owens, it wasn't just another win to add to her list of accomplishments, it was personal. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying every speech Crockett had ever given, poring over interviews and analyzing her opponent's weak points. This wasn't about scoring political points. It was about proving a point she'd been making her entire career, that conservative ideas could stand toe-to-toe with progressive ones. Insiders close to Owens revealed that she approached the debate like a chess match, thinking several moves ahead. She didn't just want to win, she wanted to dismantle what she saw as flawed arguments. But even with all her preparation, the intensity of the moment caught her off guard. People around her noticed a shift after the debate. Sure, she appeared confident on camera, posting videos and engaging with supporters online, but privately, she couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. Late at night, when the cameras were off and the noise died down, Owens reportedly replayed the debate in her mind. She thought about the reactions, the cheers from her supporters, the venom from her critics, and the countless memes mocking Crockett. It wasn't guilt that kept her up, but something deeper. Had she gone too far? Was it possible to be truthful without being brutal? These questions lingered in her mind, even as she doubled down publicly. On the other side, things were even tougher for Crockett. The backlash hit her hard. Progressive circles rallied around her, calling Owens's performance a calculated attack designed to silence meaningful dialogue. But support from allies didn't erase the sting of defeat. She retreated from the spotlight, skipping media appearances and staying away from social media. Friends said she spent hours watching clips of the debate, dissecting every misstep and wondering where she had gone wrong. Crockett's team tried to shield her from the worst of the criticism, but it was impossible to ignore. Late-night talk shows mocked her, trolls flooded her mentions, and even some within her own party questioned whether she had what it took to represent their values on such a big stage. The pressure mounted until it felt unbearable. Some insiders claimed she considered stepping away from politics altogether, overwhelmed by the scrutiny and self-doubt. But then came the twist no one saw coming. Days after the debate, sources leaked that Owens and Crockett had secretly met for coffee. No cameras, no reporters, just the two of them sitting across from each other at a quiet cafe. Details of their conversation remained tightly guarded, but rumors began to swirl. Word got out that they talked about more than just the debate. They discussed their shared frustrations with the current state of American politics. They admitted feeling trapped by the expectations placed on them, forced to play roles dictated by their respective bases. According to whispers from people close to the meeting, the tone wasn't hostile. Instead, it was surprisingly candid. Both women acknowledged the pressures they faced and the toll it took on their mental health. They also found themselves agreeing on certain issues: criminal justice reform, education funding, and the need for better resources in underserved communities. It wasn't a full-blown alliance, but it was a start. When news of the meeting broke, reactions were mixed. Skeptics dismissed it as a PR stunt, accusing both women of trying to soften their images. After the heated debate, others saw it as a glimmer of hope, proof that even bitter rivals could find common ground when they set aside their egos. Grassroots organizations jumped on the opportunity, using the buzz to organize community forums and discussions. Suddenly, People who had never paid attention to politics before were showing up to these events, eager to see if collaboration was truly possible. For Owens, the meeting seemed to spark a change. While she remained steadfast in her beliefs, she began speaking more openly about the importance of listening to opposing viewpoints. In interviews, she emphasized that disagreement didn't have to mean disrespect. Her tone softened slightly, though her core message stayed the same. Critics accused her of flip-flopping, but her supporters praised her for evolving. Crockett, too, emerged from her self-imposed exile with renewed determination. She returned to the public eye, giving speeches that focused less on ideology and more on practical solutions. She spoke about the challenges faced by everyday Americans, struggles that transcended political labels. Her authenticity resonated with audiences, earning her praise from unexpected corners. Even some of Owens's supporters admitted that Crockett's new approach felt refreshing. As the weeks went by, hints of a potential partnership began to surface. Sources close to both women confirmed they were exploring ways to work together on bipartisan initiatives. The idea seemed almost unthinkable, a conservative firebrand and a progressive advocate joining forces. But the momentum was undeniable. People started talking about what such a collaboration could achieve. Could they tackle poverty, improve access to health care, reform the criminal justice system? The possibilities felt limitless. Of course, not everyone was on board. Hardliners on both sides dug in their heels, accusing Owens and Crockett of betraying their principles. Conservative pundits labeled Owens a sellout, while progressive activists called Crockett a traitor for working with someone they viewed as antithetical to their cause. Social media erupted with hashtags like "My Stay in Your Lane" and "No Compromise," reflecting the deep divisions that still existed. Despite the backlash, grassroots movements continued to grow. Ordinary citizens, tired of endless bickering and partisan gridlock, embraced the idea of unity. Town halls filled up faster than expected, with people from different backgrounds coming together to share their experiences and brainstorm solutions. For the first time in years, conversations shifted from blame to action. The turning point came during one of these town hall meetings. A young activist stood up and addressed the crowd, saying, "Why can't we focus on what unites us instead of tearing each other apart?" The room fell silent as his words sank in. It was a simple statement, but it carried immense power. People nodded in agreement, realizing that the path forward required compromise. Not capitulation, but collaboration. Owens and Crockett watched these developments closely. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Critics would continue to attack and resistance would remain strong. But they also recognized an opportunity, a chance to prove that progress was possible, even in the most divided times. Their secret meeting had planted a seed, and now it was up to them to nurture it into something meaningful. What happened next would astonish the nation and redefine the way people thought about politics. The whispers of a potential alliance between Owens and Crockett grew louder, until, finally, it became impossible to ignore. In an announcement that stunned the nation, the two women revealed they were teaming up to launch a bipartisan initiative called the Unity Agenda. The name itself was bold, a direct challenge to the divisive rhetoric that had dominated American politics for years. Their goal? To tackle some of the country's most pressing issues: poverty, inequality, and access to resources in underserved communities. When the news broke, reactions were as polarized as ever. Supporters hailed the move as a breath of fresh air, proof that even bitter rivals could put aside their differences for the greater good. "This is what leadership looks like," one grassroots organizer tweeted. "If these two can work together, why can't the rest of us?" Others saw it as a rare moment of hope in a political landscape often defined by gridlock and hostility. For many Americans, it felt like a step toward healing, a chance to focus on solutions rather than arguments. But not everyone was convinced. Critics on both sides wasted no time tearing into the initiative. Conservative hardliners accused Owens of betraying her principles, calling her a sellout for working with someone they viewed as fundamentally opposed to their values. Progressive activists weren't any kinder, labeling Crockett a traitor who had abandoned her base for a photo op. Social media exploded with hashtags like "Stay in your lane" and "No compromise," reflecting the deep mistrust that still simmered beneath the surface. Despite the backlash, the Unity Agenda pressed forward. Its core mission was simple yet ambitious: create practical, actionable policies that could make a real difference in people's lives. The agenda included proposals to expand affordable housing, improve job training programs, and increase funding for mental health services. It wasn't flashy or revolutionary. It was grounded in reality, focusing on steps that could actually be implemented rather than lofty ideals that sounded good on paper but achieved little. To kick things off, Owens and Crockett organized a series of town halls across the country. These events weren't your typical political rallies filled with scripted speeches and empty promises. Instead, they invited ordinary citizens, teachers, small business owners, single parents, veterans, to share their stories and offer input. The goal was to listen, not lecture. At each stop, Owens and Crockett sat side by side, taking notes and asking questions. They didn't always agree, but they listened respectfully, acknowledging the humanity behind every story. One particularly memorable town hall took place in a struggling Midwest city. A young mother stood up and shared how she juggled 3 jobs just to keep food on the table while raising her kids alone. Her voice cracked as she described the stress of living paycheck to paycheck, unsure if she'd ever catch a break. When she finished speaking, there was a long pause before Owens responded. "I don't know what it's like to walk in your shoes," Owens admitted, her tone softer than usual. "But I hear you, and we're here because we want to change that." Crockett nodded in agreement, adding, "You shouldn't have to fight this hard just to survive. That's why we're doing this, to give people like you a fighting chance." Moments like these struck a chord with audiences. For the first time in ages, people felt seen and heard. Grassroots organizations jumped on board, hosting smaller community forums inspired by the Unity Agenda. Neighbors who had never spoken to each other started showing up at these events, eager to contribute ideas and find common ground. It wasn't perfect. Arguments still broke out occasionally, but the fact that people were willing to try mattered more than anything. As momentum built, so did resistance. Powerful interest began pushing back against the initiative, fearing it might disrupt the status quo. Anonymous leaks surfaced, alleging that corporate donors were using the Unity Agenda as a smokescreen to push neoliberal policies disguised as bipartisanship. Protesters disrupted events, holding signs that read "No compromise" and shouting slogans like "Stay in your lane." Tensions ran high, and it seemed like the fragile coalition Owens and Crockett had built might collapse under the weight of opposition. Amid the chaos, a pivotal moment occurred during a town hall in the South. A man in his late 50s, wearing a worn-out flannel shirt and boots caked with dirt, stood up and addressed the crowd. His weathered face told a story of years spent working manual labor jobs that barely paid enough to cover rent. "I've voted, read my whole life," he said, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "But nothing changes. My son's stuck in the same cycle I was, so tell me, why should I care whose side you're on if neither one of you fixes this mess?" The room fell silent. Owens leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "You're right," she said after a moment. "Politics has failed people like you for too long. But blaming each other isn't going to fix it. We need to start somewhere." Crockett chimed in, her tone empathetic. "We're not saying this is easy, but sitting back and waiting for someone else to solve these problems won't work either. If we don't try, nothing will change." His response surprised everyone. "Fine," he said, crossing his arms. "Prove me wrong. Show me something real comes out of this." That exchange resonated deeply, becoming a turning point for the Unity Agenda. People began realizing that progress wouldn't come from waiting for perfection. It would come from taking imperfect steps forward. Slowly but surely, pilot programs launched in several cities, testing the initiative's proposals on a smaller scale. Affordable housing projects broke ground, job training workshops opened their doors, and mental health clinics expanded their services. Early results showed promise, proving that collaboration could yield tangible benefits. Still, challenges remained. Corporate lobbyists continued trying to hijack the agenda, and partisan critics doubled down on their attacks. Some local leaders refused to participate, fearing backlash from their own parties. Yet despite these obstacles, the unity agenda persisted. What kept it alive wasn't just the efforts of Owens and Crockett. It was the determination of ordinary citizens who refused to give up. For Owens, the experience forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about her own beliefs. She realized that winning debates mattered less than finding solutions that worked. For Crockett, it reinforced the importance of staying grounded in the struggles of everyday people, even when it meant stepping outside her comfort zone. Together, they proved that unity wasn't about erasing differences. It was about embracing them and finding strength in diversity. By the time the dust settled, the unity agenda had sparked a movement far bigger than anyone anticipated. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't easy. But it planted seeds of change in communities across the country, reminding people that progress was possible, even in the most divided times. The unity agenda was gaining traction, but it wasn't smooth sailing. In fact, the harder Owens and Crockett pushed forward, the stronger the resistance became. Critics on both sides dug in their heels, determined to shut down what they saw as a betrayal of principles. Conservative hardliners accused Owens of abandoning her base, calling her decisions reckless and self-serving. Progressive activists weren't any kinder, labeling Crockett a traitor for working with someone they viewed as fundamentally opposed to their values. Social media turned into a battleground, with hashtags like "stay in your lane" and "no compromise" trending for days. The backlash spilled over into real life too. Protesters began showing up at town halls and community forums, shouting slogans and holding signs that read things like "No unity without justice" and "Sellouts don't speak for us." Some events had to be canceled altogether because of safety concerns. At one heated forum in the Northeast, tensions boiled over when a group of protesters stormed the stage, forcing Owens and Crockett to leave early. It was a stark reminder of how polarized the country still was, and how fragile their alliance really was. Behind the scenes, the pressure mounted. Owens and Crockett faced constant scrutiny from their own teams. Advisors warned them that continuing down this path could alienate their core supporters and damage their careers. For Owens, it meant risking the reputation she'd built as a fearless conservative voice. For Crockett, it meant potentially losing the trust of progressives who had championed her rise in politics. Both women knew the stakes were high, but they also knew backing down wasn't an option, not if they wanted to make a real difference. Amid the chaos, corporate interests started circling the unity agenda like vultures. Anonymous leaks surfaced, claiming that big donors were using the initiative as a way to push neoliberal policies under the guise of bipartisanship. Critics seized on these allegations, accusing Owens and Crockett of selling out to wealthy elites. The accusations stung, especially since both women had spent years railing against corporate greed in their own ways. They denied the claims, insisting that the unity agenda was about helping ordinary people, not lining anyone's pockets. But the damage was done. Trust in the initiative began to erode. Despite the growing challenges, Owens and Crockett refused to back down. They doubled down on their efforts, traveling across the country to promote the unity agenda and meet with communities directly affected by poverty and inequality. These visits weren't glamorous photo ops. They were raw, unfiltered experiences that forced both women to confront the harsh realities of life in America's most underserved areas. One such visit took them to a small rural town in the South, where jobs were scarce and hope felt even scarcer. They walked through neighborhoods dotted with abandoned houses, met families struggling to keep the lights on, and listened to stories of addiction, unemployment, and despair. One elderly woman, sitting on her porch with tears streaming down her face, told them how she hadn't seen her grandchildren in years because they'd been placed in foster care after her daughter lost custody due to drug addiction. "I don't care who you are or what party you belong to," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want someone to help us. We're drowning out here." That moment stuck with both women long after they left the town. Back on the road, during a quiet moment between stops, Owens turned to Crockett and said, "This is why we can't quit." If we walk away now, what happens to people like her? Crockett nodded, her expression somber. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but seeing it up close, it makes me realize how much is at stake. Their determination inspired others to join the fight. Grassroots organizations rallied around the unity agenda, hosting smaller forums and workshops in towns and cities across the country. People who had never engaged in politics before started showing up, eager to contribute ideas and find solutions. Teachers, nurses, factory workers, and retirees all came together to share their experiences and brainstorm ways to improve their communities. But the resistance didn't let up. At a major event in the Midwest, protesters disrupted the proceedings, chanting loudly and refusing to let Owens and Crockett speak. Security had to intervene, escorting the two women off stage while the crowd erupted in chaos. Videos of the incident went viral, reigniting debates about whether the unity agenda was doomed from the start. For a brief moment, it seemed like the entire effort might collapse. Even some of their closest allies began questioning whether the partnership was worth the cost. Owens and Crockett found themselves wrestling with doubts, wondering if they were fighting a losing battle. Late one night, after another exhausting day of defending their work, they sat together in a hotel room, surrounded by stacks of papers and empty coffee cups. "What if we're wrong?" Crockett asked quietly, breaking the silence. "What if this whole thing falls apart and all we've done is make things worse?" Owens sighed, rubbing her temples. "Maybe we are wrong. Maybe this won't work. But I'd rather fail trying to do something than sit back and watch nothing change." Her words hung in the air, heavy but true. After a long pause, Crockett nodded. "Okay, let's keep going. Whatever happens, at least we'll know we tried." They regrouped, refocused, and leaned into the challenge with renewed energy. Instead of shying away from criticism, they addressed it head-on, holding press conferences to clarify their intentions and inviting skeptics to join the conversation. They emphasized that the unity agenda wasn't about erasing differences. It was about finding common ground and working together despite those differences. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in the wall of resistance. A few prominent voices from both sides cautiously endorsed the initiative, praising its focus on practical solutions over ideological battles. Local leaders who had initially resisted started coming around, recognizing the potential benefits for their communities. Pilot programs launched in several cities showed promising results, proving that collaboration could lead to meaningful change. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't easy. But the unity agenda was starting to gain legitimacy, not because of flashy rhetoric or political maneuvering, but because of the tangible impact it was having on people's lives. Affordable housing projects broke ground, job training workshops opened their doors, and mental health clinics expanded their services. Early data showed improvements in employment rates, housing stability, and access to care. Still, the journey was far from over. Critics remained vocal, and powerful interests continued trying to undermine the initiative. But Owens and Crockett had learned something important along the way. Progress wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about persevering through it. Every setback was a chance to adapt, every challenge an opportunity to grow. By the time the dust settled, the unity agenda had sparked a movement far bigger than anyone anticipated. It wasn't just about policy changes. It was about shifting the narrative, reminding people that unity wasn't about agreeing on everything. It was about focusing on what mattered most, helping each other, no matter where you came from or what you believed. And though the road ahead would remain rocky, Owens and Crockett had proven that even in the most divided times, hope could still shine through. Months had passed since the unity agenda first launched, and while it wasn't perfect, its impact was undeniable. Pilot programs in cities across the country were showing promising results. Affordable housing projects that had once been nothing, more than blueprints, were now homes for families who had spent years on waiting lists. Job training workshops helped unemployed workers gain skills they could actually use, connecting them with employers desperate for qualified candidates. Mental health clinics expanded their services, reaching people who had long felt forgotten by the system. The numbers spoke for themselves: lower unemployment rates, fewer evictions, and increased access to care. But beyond the statistics, something deeper was happening. Hope was taking root. For Owens and Crockett, the journey hadn't been easy. They faced constant criticism, pushback from powerful interests, and even threats to their safety. Yet through it all, they kept showing up. Their partnership evolved from a fragile truce into something stronger, a shared commitment to proving that collaboration could work, even in the most divided times. It wasn't always smooth sailing. They still disagreed on plenty of things, but those disagreements became opportunities to learn rather than reasons to walk away. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and interviews, Owens and Crockett found themselves sitting together at a small diner near Capitol Hill. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the smell of coffee filled the air. Neither woman said much at first. They were too tired to do anything but sip their drinks in silence. Finally, Owens broke the quiet. "You know," she said, her voice softer than usual, "I never thought I'd say this, but working with you has changed me." Crockett raised an eyebrow, half smiling. "Changed you how?" Owens hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Before all this, I thought compromise meant losing. Like, if I gave an inch, I'd lose a mile. But now, I see it differently. Compromise doesn't mean giving up, it means finding a way to move forward even when it's hard." Crockett nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I get what you're saying. For me, it's been about letting go of the idea that change has to happen overnight. I used to think if we didn't fix everything right away, then we'd failed. But seeing these little victories, it's made me realize progress is messy, and that's okay." Their conversation that night reflected a shift, not just in them, but in the movement they had started. What began as a controversial alliance had grown into something bigger than either woman could have imagined. The unity agenda wasn't just about policy anymore, it was about inspiring others to take action too. Grassroots organizations sprang up in towns and cities across the country, led by ordinary citizens who wanted to make a difference. People who had never considered themselves political suddenly found themselves organizing community cleanups, mentoring kids, or volunteering at food banks. The ripple effect of Owens and Crockett's partnership was spreading far beyond Washington, D.C. Historians would later look back on this period as a turning point, a moment when two fierce opponents chose dialogue over division and action over animosity. While some dismissed the unity agenda as a fleeting trend, others saw it as proof that meaningful change was possible, even in a fractured society. Schools began teaching lessons about the initiative, framing it as an example of how cooperation could bridge divides. Journalists wrote articles analyzing its successes and failures, sparking debates about the future of bipartisanship in America. But perhaps the most profound legacy of the unity agenda was the way it reshaped conversations around politics. For so long, debates had focused on tearing each other down, emphasizing differences rather than shared goals. Owens and Crockett proved that it didn't have to be that way. By focusing on solutions instead of blame, they inspired others to do the same. Families gathered around dinner tables, co-workers chatted during breaks, and neighbors exchanged ideas over fences, all because two women dared to reach across the aisle. Of course, not everyone celebrated their efforts. Critics continued to accuse them of prioritizing optics over substance, pointing to corporate involvement as evidence that the agenda was compromised. Some local leaders refused to implement its programs, fearing backlash from their own parties. Resistance remained strong, especially among those who believed compromise was a betrayal of principles. But even amid the criticism, the unity agenda persisted. Its message resonated too deeply with too many people to simply fade away. As time went on, Owens and Crockett stepped back slightly from the spotlight, allowing grassroots organizers to take the lead. They knew the movement couldn't rely solely on their names, it needed to stand on its own. Still, they stayed involved, offering guidance and support whenever needed. In interviews, they spoke less about themselves and more about the power of collective action. "This isn't about us," Crockett said during one televised appearance. "It's about everyone who's rolled up their sleeves and gotten to work. Change happens when people come together, not when they wait for someone else to do it for them. For Owens, the experience reinforced her belief in the importance of listening. She often told audiences, "You don't have to agree with someone to understand where they're coming from. Sometimes understanding is enough to start making progress." Her words struck a chord, especially with younger generations eager to break free from the cycle of division. By the end of the year, the Unity Agenda had planted seeds of change in communities across the nation. It wasn't a magic solution. It didn't erase poverty, inequality, or injustice overnight, but it laid the groundwork for something better. People began to see that progress wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. Every affordable home built, every job created, every life touched was a step toward a brighter future. Looking back, historians agreed on one thing. The debate between Owens and Crockett might have shocked the nation, but it was what happened afterward that truly mattered. Their unlikely partnership reminded America of something it had almost forgotten: that unity isn't about erasing differences. It's about embracing them, learning from them, and using them to build something stronger. In the end, the story of Owens and Crockett wasn't just about two women. It was about a nation struggling to find its way. Through their courage, determination, and willingness to listen, they showed that even in the darkest times, hope can still shine through. And though challenges remained, their legacy served as a beacon, guiding others toward a path of healing and possibility.